Thanks for joining us this morning. My name's Jeff Kavanagh, and I'm joined by my colleague Omar Din.
Morning.
We're from MHA Tate Walker Wealth Management, and we look after the George F. White pension scheme. So in terms of today, your employer thought it'd be useful just for you to get an update on the pension scheme, how it works, how it's performing, just an opportunity, a general update to see how it's doing. And I'm going to cover that off, and also that Omar's going to provide you with an update just in terms of what options people have at retirement now. There's been a lot of changes to pensions over the last few years in terms of what people can do at retirement. So, it's really important to see what your pension's doing when you're there now, paying the money in. But more importantly, it's what can you do with it ultimately, and what that'll provide you with in retirement and what your options are. So firstly, I'm just going to provide a bit of an update in terms of Tate Walker, a bit of background in terms of who we are. I know there'll be a lot of you joiners since the scheme was first set up. So we'll start by doing that. Importantly, if you've got any questions, we're happy to take those during the webinar. And also we'll pause at the end for any questions and we can cover them off then too. So just here, just the first slide there, just having the contact details and a bit of a background about myself and Omar. We've both been in the financial services industry for 15 to 20 years, and we've been with Tate Walker for a number of years. So Tate Walker, MHA Tate Walker, who are we? What do we do? So in the main, we're a chartered accountancy practice, and we have 6 offices across the north. As you can see there, the main office being where we are today in Gosforth in Newcastle. We have 165 team members across those 6 offices, and that's still growing as we speak. We pride ourselves on being a firm from the north, with long roots laid down in the north, and been active in Northeast for over 80 years. We've been a chartered accountancy practice, so there's a number of services that we offer. So Omar and I, we work in the wealth management department, and that's traditionally offering what you would expect in terms of financial services, so advice in relation to investments, pensions, protection and the like, life cover alongside mortgages, and for business protection also. I suppose the main takeaway for ourselves in terms of what we offer and what we do is that we're independent advisors and whole of market. So whenever we've recommended a pension for the likes of George F. White and yourselves, we're whole of market advisors. We're not tied to any one insurance company. We're purely guided by what's best for you and your individual circumstances. So just one of the other main service lines that I think is really applicable here, and a bit of a USP for ourselves, is that within the chartered accountancy practice, we have a large taxation department. And where that's really useful from a financial planning side of things is we can work closely with them to provide a joined up approach. So if we get the investments and the pension planning right, and alongside that, we get the tax planning right, that's where people really see a long-term benefit of that. So here, I'm just going to cover off a bit of background about the George F. White pension scheme, who it's with and why it's with them. So as many of you will know, the pension scheme is with Scottish Widows, and that was jointly chosen by ourselves and George F. White. So the reasons the scheme was chosen, there's a number of things we've got to look at. With us being whole of market independent advisors, we can use anybody in the marketplace. So we wanted to make sure we get the most competitive scheme possible. Now, when auto enrolment, which is the legislation that came in to make sure every employee in the country was put into a pension scheme, when that came about, the government set up a default scheme, and it's called Nest. And that's where, if nobody set up their own bespoke pension scheme, by default, you would use Nest. And that was very restrictive, high charges. It wasn't fit for purpose. your employer wanted to make sure, actually, rather than just go with the default, wanted to make sure they secured a competitive pension scheme on a number of fronts to make sure that your pension provision could grow and be managed in the most competitive environment. So as part of our research and the exercise we did, we shortlisted that to a few insurance companies, and Scottish Widows was chosen as the most competitive. And the reasons for that, they're a major pension provider, one of the biggest pension providers in the UK. In terms of their level of servicing and administration, so when people are taking money out, so it's just as important when you're paying money in, but when we see our clients with Scottish Widows and they're taking money out of their pension, you see that they're doing that really efficiently. They're not putting barriers in the way. They're putting people into a seamless retirement. So the next big thing in terms of what we were looking for in terms of a pension provider, they have a suitable range of funds to switch into. So what that means is, in terms of the investment funds, so we recommend a default fund where your money is invested. But for those that want to choose their own investments and have something more bespoke, Scottish Widows offers hundreds of different alternative investment funds. So there's a real wide choice there. Whereas the government's default scheme of Nest, it had very limited, a handful of funds. And if those didn't fit for you and your purposes, then you were restricted. That was it. You had to stick with those. Whereas what we've got with Scottish Widows, with a large number of funds, if the one that we're recommending becomes uncompetitive, then we can simply make a recommendation to you and George F. White that we switch into a more competitively performing fund. And that's something we update every year. We monitor it throughout the year. And then at the annual review, we make a recommendation to George F. White and yourselves that we're sticking with that investment fund, and this is why. And also, we're also reviewing Scottish Widows on an ongoing basis. And for whatever reason, if they became uncompetitive as a provider, or we were seeing administration issues, then at that point, we could also make a recommendation to switch. It would have to be quite extreme for us to do that, but this is an ongoing thing to ensure you're always in the most competitive pension scheme and not just left in a poor default Nest scheme. Then we come on to charges. Now, this is really, really important because the charges, that's going to impact and affect what you have in retirement and how much is there for you. So the higher the charge, the less you'll have in retirement. Now, when auto enrollment came in, the government said that insurance companies and investment providers couldn't charge any more than 0.75% per annum on individual members' pension pots. Now, most providers just brought their costs in and said, right, we'll just cap it at 0.75, the highest we can. With the work we did with George F. White and the research and the tendering exercise we went through, we managed to secure an annual management charge of 0.5%. So what that means is we're really competitively cost here. That is a really low charge for a competitively performing pension scheme with the likes of a big player such as Scottish Widows. So that's really competitive. As I say, a lot of providers just stuck at the 0.75. One of the things we look at as well is the financial strength of a company that we're recommending. We want to make sure that we're comfortable that they're going to be around longer term to ensure when you get into retirement, they're there and to see you in through that process. And Scottish Widows, as I said before, is one of the largest providers in the UK. So in terms of the level of pension contributions that are paid into your scheme. So again, when the legislation for auto enrollment came in, the government brought in a minimum default basis, and that was called qualifying earnings. And that's been phased in into 2019 when the final premium levels came in. Qualifying earnings was the government minimum basis, and that was to say an employer would have to pay in 3% of qualifying earnings, an employee pays 5%. But the key thing with qualifying earnings is those contribution basis, that's not based on all of your pay. So if you can see there in the right-hand paragraph, actually what qualifying earnings means is that those percentages are only based on earnings between £6,240 and £50,270. So anything you earn up to 6,240 doesn't receive a pension contribution on, and anything above 50,270 doesn't either. So because of this, again, George F. White didn't want to do just the bare minimum. They wanted to choose a more competitive basis and to ensure it was fair. So they chose an alternative option, which the regulator and the government allow. So it's more than just the default option. And they've chosen tier 3, which is called total earnings. So that means that the 3% that George F. White pay is based on your total earnings, so everything. So it doesn't miss the 6,240. They're paying their pension contribution based on the first 1p and upwards and everything thereafter. So it's really competitive. And in terms of that as well, George F. White actually, they didn't wait until 2019. They actually came in when the scheme started in 2014. They were ahead in terms of what they were paying. They paid higher than the minimum levels from day one. Now, employee contributions on total earnings is only required that 4% is paid in, and that's just purely based on the fact that your contributions are based on a higher amount. So the government is saying the employee doesn't have to pay in more. The key thing here is you're not limited to that 4%. If you would like to pay in more and that's affordable to you when you're looking at your short, medium and longer term expenditure and goals, then that's something you can do. And you can do that via your payroll department. So a big part of the pension is when your money's paid in, it's got to be invested somewhere, and that's to ensure that it's growing. As we all know at the moment, inflation's rising, so it's making sure every pound you're paying in now, longer term, is retaining that purchasing power in the future. So when you come to retirement, it's retained that purchasing power, and it's not just been left in cash, effectively going backwards. So we choose what's called a default investment option. And that's where, unless you chose yourself, then your contributions will be invested into this fund. It's called the balanced investment approach. Now, what this fund does, as you can see on this graph, okay, on the bottom where you've got 15, 10, 5, so that's years to retirement. And then at the side axis, you've got level of risk. So when you're 15 years from retirement, it's taking more risk because you've got more time to ride out any short-term volatility, and it's trying to grow your money by investing across a broad range of assets, including some stocks and shares, some government bonds, but your money is fully diversified. But then as we get closer to retirement, we want to make sure that that growth that you've built up in the earlier years is starting to be protected. So from 15 years, it starts to de-risk you. You've still got an element of exposure to stocks and shares and the like, but it's just reducing, trying to protect that growth. And if we were to see short-term volatility like we're seeing at the moment, and you're about to retire, then you're not going to be fully exposed to that. As I say, this is the option that we choose. We continually monitor this fund. If you have an interest in investments yourselves, and that's something you want to choose and monitor yourself, you have the option to do that direct with Scottish Widows. But this is the fund that, if you want peace of mind, it's being reviewed by professionals on an ongoing basis, and we provide that update and recommendation year on year to George F. White, then this is the fund that you'll automatically go into. So here, just looking at the performance of the fund. So just to see how it's performed over the last 5 years. So the blue line is the main investment fund that you'll be invested in unless you've chosen your own investment funds. And the green line is just a benchmark for that sector. So just plotted against its peers over 5 years. So the fund, it's seen some volatility recently. If we go back to April 20, you can see the big dip there. And that was when COVID hit 2 years ago. And markets saw turbulence and volatility at that point. It's since recovered, and as I mentioned before, we're seeing some short-term volatility here. But the key thing is the fund's outperforming the benchmark over 5 years. As I said before, we continually review that. If the fund became uncompetitive for any reason, we'd be making a recommendation to George F. White and yourselves to switch, and that will be at no cost to yourselves. That's all part of the ongoing service we provide. So that's an update in terms of the pension scheme. As I say, any questions we can take at the end, and we can pick up with people individually. Omar's now going to just cover off a brief update in relation to retirement planning and what options people have under the current rules.
Brilliant, thanks Jeff. Good morning everyone. Like Jeff mentioned at the start, I'm a financial planner here as well. The next few slides are just about focusing on retirement really. Obviously everyone different points in their life, in their career. These are things, does become a lot more prevalent the closer you get to retirement, as in the options, what you should be doing, what you should be thinking about. And this has just been a bit of a whistle-stop tour on some of the things just to keep you aware of what's going on really. When we talk about retirement income, we don't just mean from a pension. Now, most people realistically, a pension will be the main source of the biggest asset they've probably paid into within their livelihood for retirement. But there are certain different things that people also have. Part of our job and part of the service we provide when it comes to that time of life is an income from any source as tax efficiently as possible. That's the real key. Jeff related to it before with our links being part of an accountancy firm. We know about tax, we can't advise on tax. So if we come across an individual where tax is an issue and we need some advice, we can bring one of our colleagues in to discuss with the individual. So yeah, it's from a range of things. So you have a pension, property's become very, very attractive in the last few years. A lot of people have a buy-to-let, or they're looking to have one, or something they've inherited. Cash, people might use cash savings. And inheritance, it's not a nice part of it, but most people might inherit something in the future that they think will be used towards their retirement. If you're part of a business or you have shares in a business, again, that could be a form of retirement. And again, general investments such as ISAs, unit trusts, bonds. Some of the key questions we hear from our own clients, and I'm sure some of these might resonate with you. Will I have enough to live in retirement? That's always the key. We're working hard, we're building pensions and everything else in our lives, but it's all about getting there. Am I going to have enough to live on and do what I want to do? How are my pensions performing? So obviously, as Jeff mentioned, we monitor and keep an eye on the George F. White scheme, but there might be other paid up pensions or anything else that you've accumulated. When will I run out of money? So am I spending enough? Am I doing what I should be doing? How do pensions work in retirement? And I'm going to come on to that. What sort of lifestyle can I afford? And do I still have to purchase an annuity? So annuity is part of the buzzword at the moment, as there's been a lot of changes. So I'm just going to talk through different scenarios really. So in 2015, we had something called pension freedoms come in. So that was a new law, and that changed how people could access pension pots in retirement. Now, normal retirement age is 55 as legislation at the moment. It is rising to 57 in the next few years, and we expect it will continue to rise. It's sort of, they're gearing to keep it about 10 years behind the state pension. So we'll continue to see and see how that moves in the future. But just a bit of an update on what happened before. So prior to 2015, when drawdown or the new pension freedoms didn't come in, this is what you could do with a pension. I've just got a simple illustration with a pot of 100,000. So you were allowed to take 25% tax-free, so 25,000 in this example, and the remaining 75,000 you had to purchase what was called an annuity. So the 25,000, the 25% tax-free, that was a lump sum paid out, and typical spends, people paid off remaining mortgage, had the big once in a lifetime holiday, home improvements, money to children, which has become a lot more sort of common in the last few years. Buying a car, the list is endless, put it in the bank. So that 25% was taken and people did whatever they needed to do. The remaining 75,000 to 75%, you had to purchase what was called an annuity. So an annuity is a guaranteed income for life. So at the point when you came to retire, they would look at your pension pot, and an annuity company would look at your age, health, how long you expect to live, how long you expect to live, sorry, where you live, your postcode, your health, other bits and pieces, and they would offer you an annuity based. What happened is annuity rates have sort of really come down over the last few years, making it less and less attractive. So just as an example, someone age 55 purchasing an annuity on a level basis, you're looking at about 4%, about 3,240 pre-tax for the rest of your life. So that's what you would get every year, paid on a monthly basis, guaranteed for the rest of your life. It would never change. The good news is, if you live more than 23 years, you got more than you put in. If not, the money was lost. And that became really, really important to the death benefits within an annuity. If someone took one, they could never change it. You could build in a spouses or dependent pension, but if you didn't at the time, because it reduced the starting income, something happened to you, it basically died with you, and that's where it kind of turned people off. How things have since changed. The best way we think about it is a pension is now sort of a flexible savings plan that you can't touch till age 55, as I've mentioned. It works on the same basis. You allow 25% tax-free, and the remaining amount, 75%, 75,000, it's a taxable pot. Most importantly, you do not need to buy an annuity. So again, the 25%, you could take it out, you could do the range of things as we've mentioned, but the one thing I will bring in, you don't have to take it. When you were purchasing an annuity, if you didn't take the tax-free cash, the 25%, you lost the benefit of doing that. Now, if you don't need to take a lump sum, if you've got no actual financial need, then you would just leave it in the pension and access it as and when you need to. The remaining 75%, so again 75,000, it goes into what's called Flexi Access drawdown. So it's fully flexible, so you can access it as and when you want to, and you draw down on it just like any other account, really. Okay, so Flexi Access drawdown is what came in. It effectively meant that if you were taking any income from a pension, you could take a mixture of the tax-free cash element and the taxable element, or you could take both, or you could take a lump sum. Flexible was the issue, but the main part on the death benefit was the pension pot was still invested. You're drawing down on it. The rest is still there. If something ever happened to you, then the remaining amount would be passed on to whoever you nominated: spouse, civil partner, children. The list is endless. Okay. Some considerations about when you're in that journey towards retirement. So how much are you saving now? How much can you afford to save? Are pensions the best place? As I've mentioned, there's a range of other assets that people use. So pensions might be one part. We always talk about diversification. Obviously, the tax benefits of saving into a pension, the tax relief you get, etc. And then, as Jeff mentioned, the things that we're looking at, sort of what the cost is of the pension, the performance, because obviously that's going to dictate how your pension grows, and then the risk you take within the pension. So we followed sort of a balanced risk on that, but you can choose something depending on what your own sort of parameters are. The next part is sort of then considerations when you're looking to access your pension. So the income you need. We spend a lot of time on an individual basis with clients talking about income and expenditure. So what you need now, what your expenses are, but then how that's going to change in retirement. For example, you most likely will have paid off your mortgage. You most likely, if you've got children, they will have moved out and they're no longer sort of financially dependent on you. To a degree, children are always financially dependent, but yeah, the main part, they're not really there. So it's about how much you need in retirement, how much you need in your 80s. The reality is of life, when you retire, you're doing more, you're traveling more. As you get older, you spend less. I mean, that's not always the case, but generally speaking, that is what happens. Are you planning to continue working in phase in retirement? So again, that's very popular at the moment, where you may decide that the full-time, high-pressured, serious job, whatever it is that you're doing, I don't want to do that. I want to sort of take off that bit of responsibility, work 2 or 3 days, or do something else 2 or 3 days, and take in any shortfall from the pension. So phasing retirement is, again, very, very popular. the death benefits, as in what happens to the pension when you die, the IHT position, and then the tax treatment, as I mentioned, when you're accessing pensions. So these are all kind of things to be thinking about. How can we help? So part of the service that we offer to all employers where we look after a pension scheme, obviously to do presentations like this, give them some generic information, but also we are happy to arrange a sort of a free initial call with any individual to discuss their circumstances, okay, and how we can sort of help. If you then wanted to sort of proceed on an individual basis, sort of separate from the employer, we're more than happy to do that. We can arrange a meeting, discuss your own finance, develop a bespoke plan, etc., bespoke to you, but that is on an individual basis, separate from George F. White. Obviously, part of that, we model any what-if scenarios. So in the future, large sums of children, family, or other life events. Cash flow modeling, that's a big part of the work we do. So that's sort of looking at all of your finances, putting everything into the tool and sort of plotting what the future looks like in different scenarios, depending on what you're looking like. Income strategies, again, if there is a tax or income issue, how we can try and get around that. And again, discussions just around your general goals, what your money's doing, what you want to do. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own set of goals and what they want to achieve. In terms of contact, you may be aware there is a dedicated email, gfwhite@tatewalker.co.uk. So for anything scheme specific to the George F. White pension scheme, you can just email that email address and someone will get back to you based on anything scheme specific. Obviously, for any individual queries, if anybody following this call, that's completely private. If you want to discuss anything, then by all means, there's Jeff's and myself's contact details, and we're more than happy to assist and chat anything through with anybody.